Let's talk about Final Destination Bloodlines, which is the latest film in the Final Destination franchise, the ending, all of that. We do have a review if you want to go check that out as well, where we just discuss it, no spoilers. Here we're going to get deep into spoilers, and I'm also going to be doing a video tomorrow where we discuss the Final Destination franchise as a whole and explain everything, how Final Destination Bloodlines works as both a prequel, but also as a wraparound to the whole franchise. So let's get into it. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. We talk about all the things you love in pop culture, so don't miss out on any of our videos by subscribing and hitting the notification bell. But let's get into Bloodlines. So in 1968, Iris Campbell and her fiance Paul are going to an opening ceremony of the Skyview Restaurant Tower. Now this is a huge tower. It's almost like the CN Tower or the Seattle Tower, all that, where you pretty much see that there is this big like spinning like disc. I don't think it spins here, but it's like a needle type building, and it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous, right? But what eventually happens is that Iris has a premonition that the chandelier will break, the glass floor beneath the guests will open up, the gas heater leaks, and a damage occurs to the structure, but also an explosion. And this is all caused by different things throughout as well. Even a penny that a kid throws at one point is a root cause of it all, and we'll get back to that penny. So what Iris eventually does, however, is stop all of this from happening, because we see that 56 years later, Stefanie Reyes, who is a granddaughter to Iris, is now having the same premonition, and it's causing her to have nightmares. She can't sleep at night. She isn't doing good in school because of this. So she tries to go back home to find answers, because she keeps having this dream of Iris, and she remembers that Iris is her grandmother's name, which her family is sort of ostracized from, because they see Iris as somebody who has lost it and they don't really want to be associated with her anymore. So when she goes back home, she sees her father as well as her brother Charlie, and Charlie and Stefanie don't really have the best relationship. We quickly find out it's because he feels abandoned by Stefanie. She doesn't call or anything like that. Also, Stefanie's mother isn't part of the family at this point. It seems that maybe what Iris was saying about death and being connected to death may have gotten to Iris's mother. So Stefanie decides to go with Charlie to visit their uncle Howard as well as their aunt Brenda in order to find more answers about Iris. She can't turn to her mother because her mother apparently abandoned them when they were young. So she goes to her uncle Howard, who is a brother to her mother, and of course both of them are the kids of Iris. They also have their cousins Eric, Julie, and Bobby as well, who are their cousins here. So one big happy family, which is very different from the rest of the Final Destination movies, which currently are more about a friend group or just a random group of people, right, getting into this whole ordeal. Now Howard explains to Stefanie that he really doesn't want to talk about Iris and all of that, and explains that Iris was the reason that Darlene, who is Stefanie's mother, became so overprotective and obsessed with death, and that eventually escalated into Darlene, Stefanie's mother, running away from the family. And we see that Howard's like, you don't want to go seeking out Iris, but Brenda, who is the aunt, pretty much says, you didn't hear from me, but you can find some of her information over there. Stefanie eventually is able to track down her grandmother Iris, who is now in a fortified cabin, pretty much not wanting to come out. She's trying to evade death as much as she can. She explains to Stefanie what happened that day at the tower. All those 56 years later, death has been trying to come for everybody that survived that, but of course people had children, grandchildren, whatever, whatnot, and so death has been slowly tracking and killing all of these people, and eventually we see that death is come to their family now, and that's the reason that Stefanie is having these premonitions, because they are next in line. Because in that premonition, actually Iris was one of the last people to die alongside a young boy, so it's time for Iris's turn now, so that is why death is coming knocking on their door. Stefanie doesn't want to believe this, and she just wants to leave now. She feels very spooked about what Iris just told her, but then Iris proves it to her by coming outside, and we see her get fatally impaled through the mouth. A horrific death, honestly. I was in the theater like, what the hell just happened? Because that was honestly insanity right there. But we see that after the death of Iris, Darlene returns, and Stefanie still resents her for leaving as well. And we then see that there's a barbecue happening, and Stefanie is reading the book that Iris gave her, because right before her death she said, read this book and tell me I'm crazy, but this will actually help you out a lot. And she sees that there is a reference to somebody named JB, and we all know who JB is going to be, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But Stefanie realizes that now her family is next. So the next in line to die, based on the book that Stefanie read from Iris, would indeed be Uncle Howard. So she tries her best to get there in time, but eventually we see that Uncle Howard gets killed by a lawnmower, which was just like, what the fuck? I really was wondering how this death was going to be, as it was just like sort of teasing you throughout with the glass and everything, and then eventually it showcased like, yeah, this is how it's going to be, and really took me for a loop. There's a lot of surprises in Final Destination Bloodlines. So now they're mourning Uncle Howard, they're mourning Iris, and now Stefanie says it's going to happen in this order because that's how the book details it with Death. That's how things work. Death has been tracking all the people that survived that night and been killing them in order of survival and their descendants and things like that. So now that Iris is dead, the oldest son of Iris died, which was Howard. So now it's time for his children to die. But the father of Stefanie and Aunt Brenda aren't going to die because they're not part of the family lineage. So she says the next one to die is going to be Eric because he's the oldest. And Eric and Julia are pretty much like, we don't believe you. You're just crazy and you just need to stop. Bobby's a little bit more hesitant to believe her, but he's still kind of like spooked about this. And Charlie as well. He's just like, I don't know what to believe anymore. But the rest of the family kind of sees Stefanie as a black sheep now because she's like talking about them all dying these freakish deaths. That night we see that the tattoo shop that Eric works at bursts into fire, but Eric actually survives this and he says nothing happened, see? And Stefanie's a little bewildered by this and she's like, you know what? You need to be careful because I don't know what's going to happen, but you definitely are next. But what happens actually is Julia falls into a trash can accidentally and then gets crushed by a garbage truck when she gets thrown in there, and now everything's out of whack. But the big question is why? Why did Death skip Eric if he was the oldest? Why is it Julia was the next one? And this is when Aunt Brenda decides to tell them the truth. Well, because Eric was part of an affair. He wasn't really Uncle Howard's son, but he still loved you as a son, which was one of the biggest twists and one of those moments that left me gasping in the theater, honestly. What an insane reveal that was. That was really good. That was really good. So now, of course, they say Bobby's next then if we're going in that order. And we see that they try to find a way to stop this, so they want to hunt down who JB is, and they eventually come to the realization that this was a friend of Iris, and it is the young boy that we saw in the premonition that Iris had for the tower, which was one of the last two survivors alongside Iris. So Iris and the little boy survived in the vision till the very end, until they ultimately did die. So Death was following that order. So when they go to find JV, they realize it is William Bloodworth, who we've seen throughout the franchise. Of course, Tony Todd, a legend. RIP to Tony Todd, who delivers such a beautiful and heartfelt message at the end. Not just that wraps up the franchise beautifully, but that also is just a reminder of live your life, pretty much. And I really love that. It really brought a tear to my eye as well. He tells them that there really is no way to take down Death. Either you do it by taking another life and taking their life expectancy that they had left, adding it onto yours, which you've seen be done in the past, not really done well, which we'll talk about tomorrow, or by dying and being revived. Those are the only two ways. We do know that other ways that people attempted to do this maybe was by birthing a new life, which didn't work out so well in another franchise installment, which we'll talk about all those tomorrow. Right now it's just Bloodlines, y'all. Right before he does leave, though, however, he says to be careful with trying to interfere with what Death is doing. It seems that Eric doesn't listen too well because he gives Bobby an idea that why don't we just kill you and bring you back to life? The way they intend to do this is by giving Bobby some peanuts because Bobby is allergic to peanuts. With that allergic reaction, he'll die, and then Eric says they can revive him and then everything will be good. They decide to do this behind the back of both Stefanie, Darlene, and Charlie because they're not too keen on this idea, but their plan ultimately fails when they do it in an MRI machine room that malfunctions, pulling Eric because he has all of these body piercings and crushing him with a wheelchair that's inside there as well, because the MRI machine just goes into full beast mode and just pulls anything that's magnet, killing him thus there. Now, the bad thing here is that Bobby had already taken the peanut snacks, so he's already like trying his best to recuperate, trying to get his EpiPen, but ultimately as well dies when he's impaled in the head with the spring from the bending machine where they got the peanuts. So they're dead. So now we just have Darlene Darlene, we have Stefanie and Charlie in those orders to die. They flee to Iris's cabin, where the big plan is that Darlene will just stay incubated in the cabin as long as she can and survive so her children can go out to live normal lives. But as they are trying to get there, Death is flying to get to them and kill them. And we see that once they get there, they jam Stefanie's seatbelt and she can't get out now. And now Charlie has to get Darlene into the cabin. But after a chain reaction that is just so wild, this movie's full of so many wild chain reactions that it just gets crazy. We see that the cabin explodes and sends the RB into the water, with Stefanie drowning because she can't get out of the seatbelt. We see that Darlene then goes to get Charlie, who is stuck, and pleads to him to go rescue Stefanie. She tells Charlie, "Don't worry, I'll be okay," before she's impaled by a lamppost. And now Charlie's like, "Holy shit, I'm next if Stefanie dies." He rushes over and he successfully resuscitates Stefanie, who apparently died, with CPR. So now they feel, you know what? It's over. It's over. Stefanie died, I resuscitated her, so that means the chain is broken, we can live our lives normally. We see a week later has passed now, and Charlie's graduated high school. Charlie's classmates' parents tells Charlie, "You know what, Stefanie never really did die. I hear you say that a lot, that you brought her back from the dead. She just was unconscious from the drowning, so she didn't really die." And this is when Charlie and Stefanie realize, well, if you didn't really die, then that means that the chain wasn't broken. And at that moment, we see that dreadful penny, that penny that has followed us from the beginning, that little boy had at the tower, which Iris also kept after the events because she took the penny from the boy, because that penny was going to cause the fire that happened in the tower, and she put it in the book. And we saw that Stefanie dropped it when they were at the hospital, and an old lady picked it up there, and then that old lady was using it to pay for some lemonade and cookies. That penny fell. It rolled all the way out to a train track, where it was impaled into the train tracks, causing a train to derail in the neighborhood and causing it to chase down Stefanie and Charlie. And just as they think they got away from it, a lot of logs fall off of it and kills them right then and there, because death is always going to get its way. So I thought it was such an interesting way this film was portrayed. I thought that the ending of it truly was a great wrap up for the whole franchise. And you know what? What could be next after this? Could they go potentially back to the past and look at other events in which death comes for people, maybe in the 80s, maybe in the 90s? Because the story in itself is done. Like, Stefanie and Charlie are seemingly the last ones that were meant to be killed, and now that they are killed, there's no one else in that line. So death got everybody in those 56 years that survived, and all of their family members, and so on and so forth. So all of the events from the films previous were people that were descendants of those people that survived in that tower that was supposed to burn up and explode and crumble. So everybody in Final Destination 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all were descendants of those people. That's pretty much what this film is trying to say. And ultimately, they all had to die in the order of which they survived, including their family members. So that's how things were happening here. So I'm curious now that eventually we knew that JB was the last one pretty much that died, and Iris, and now their whole lineage is gone. That's a sort of wrap up to that whole franchise and that idea there. So where could they possibly go with the next one? I don't know. Could they possibly try and see if they can go back into the past and maybe look at other accidents that may have happened? There's a lot of talk about some of the bulletin boards that we saw and some of those things that happened that we haven't seen in the franchise that they could potentially go back to. But I'm curious to know what you think and what you would want to see from the franchise. Would you love to see a new story, a new idea be brought up, or do you want to go back to those past events and just have some crazy fucked up deaths as we've seen the franchise be for so long? Let me know in the comments down below. And so the reason all of them died was because they were the descendants of Iris, who was one of the last victims that survived that premonition she had. So she was pretty much the last one that death was coming for. Once Iris died, that sent a chain reaction to death to come back to get all of her lineage, starting with Howard, who was the oldest. Then it continued with his family. Eric was spared at the beginning because he wasn't exactly Howard's son. He was part of an affair, but he fucked with death, and JB said, "You don't fuck with death." So eventually he died as well, alongside Julia and Bobby as well. Then it came for Darlene, who was the second child of Iris, and it came for her, and it was trying to come for both Charlie as well as for Stefanie. They thought they survived it because they thought that when Stefanie drowned and was out, that she was completely dead. But as the doctor says, no, you were just unconscious. So they didn't cheat death. And so that's why they were eventually got as well. So death was going to come regardless because you don't fuck with death. Because honestly, I think this was just a great way to finish the story. So I don't know if they can do anything else for it, but we'll see. But as always, comment down below your thoughts and opinions. Make sure you hit that subscribe and notification bell. We are on the road to 50,000 subscribers, 10,000 away from that. So make sure that you are subscribing. Tomorrow, we will talk about the series as a whole. We'll rank all the craziest deaths as well throughout the weekend. And it's Final Destination weekend. So we got a ton to talk about. And as always, I'll see all of you next time. Stay safe, stay positive.